Well, hello, everyone. Annie just said, behave yourself to me. And if you guys were here yesterday, she was doing goofy dances on the live. So
I should have addressed that to Aubrey. She needs to behave herself.
Yes. We were laughing because, okay, so first, welcome in. If this is your very first time on any of our lives, we like to have fun. But my name is Sarah, and this is Annie. She's the co-founder here at Hoop Sisters, and she is the resident Quilt in the Hoop pro. So that's why she's here today. But we were laughing because this is our stitch and flip class for Masterclass 103. I was told I said 104 yesterday, so sorry. It's 103. Aubrey often calls stitch and flip and stitch.
No, flip and stitch.
Yeah, and she says it like that, flip and stitch. So we were having a little fun with that. But welcome in. Thank you guys so much for hopping on and joining us. This is day 3.
Our stitch and flip day.
Stitch and flip day. Yep, it is day 3. And we still have one more after this.
I know.
So this is a fun week. I'm having fun.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you guys are. And we're just going to jump right into it today, I think. Well, first of all, yesterday we stitched out the leaf block. Did everyone get that stitch? Did you guys stitch those out? Did you have fun doing it? Have any questions about applique, which is what we covered yesterday? Drop them in the comments if you do, and we'll pin those comments and make sure we answer them before the end of the live. Were you going to say something?
Nope, I'm just agreeing with you.
Okay. And then today we're doing stitch and flip, which is in that flower block that you see right here. So we're going to stitch this one out live. Do you want to talk a little about stitch and flip?
Yes.
Before we start.
You have to stitch before you can flip.
You can't flip your fabric.
Right, until you stitch it.
Yeah.
So basically the stitch and flip that we're talking about with our designs is basically, it's kind of been adapted from paper piecing. So if you're, except you don't have to like turn the paper upside down and all that. So it's basically, we show you where to put your fabric. You put your fabric down, you tack down your first piece, and then you take the next piece and you put it right sides together, stitches the seam, that's the stitch part. And then you're going to flip it and finger press to make sure it's nice and smooth. And then the machine will stitch it tacked out. So this block that Sarah's going to stitch today is really pretty. When you first look at it, you're like, it looks like applique. But the cool thing about it, it has a darker, and it's applique, but it also has some stitch and flip elements within the applique, which is very cool.
And I see someone over on YouTube said, trying to find you in the VIP group on Facebook. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of a technical issue going live on Facebook at first today, but we are live over there now.
Yes.
So if you go back over there, you'll see us live right there. So welcome to everyone from Facebook. Sorry we were a little late today.
I see some Facebook people out there.
Yeah, so I know we're good there.
Yep.
Okay. So Annie just kind of gave you a rundown of what stitch and flip is, kind of how it got that name, and we gave you the proper name for the process
and the proper order to
do it in. Yes. So now we're just going to jump right into the demo part. This is going to be a little more demo heavy today because we're going to stitch out this block. There's more piecing in this because of the stitch and flip technique, so it'll take a little bit longer than our leaf block. But let's just jump over there.
I think they'll enjoy watching you.
Yes. Oh, Mary said she took a nap, so she didn't get her leaf blocks done yesterday, but today is the day.
A nap sounds just as good as stitching a block.
Yes. Yes, it does. Okay. Okay. So we are over at the machine. As always, I have battleizer in the hoop. That's our batting and stabilizer combination. And we did step 1, which was to sew the placement stitch. You would want to do this with a water-soluble thread. I'm using, it's a light peach kind of a thread so that we can see it a little bit better. I did step 1 now, and we're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 is an optional step. You can add the additional wool batting like we've talked about for the past this is our third day talking about it. That just gives you a little more loft and dimension in your block. If you don't want to add that, you don't want to use wool, that's totally fine. Just skip step 2 and move on to step 3. I'm going to add it for today though. So I'll just align it right in our placement stitch. And then with a water soluble thread still in the needle, we're going to sew our tack down. Okay, and now for step 3, we're going to take our background fabric and we'll align that over our block, and we're going to tack that down with water soluble thread as well. Now, if you are using the wool batting, make sure you remember, if you're able to raise your presser foot so it just kind of skims over the top for that tack down step and any type of placement steps or things that would come after this. So I'm just going to align my background fabric. You'll keep your water soluble thread just in the needle. And by the way, in the bobbin, I don't have water soluble thread. I just have a regular pre-wound embroidery bobbin. But now we're going to sew our tack down. This will also sew the placement stitch for the flower. Elizabeth says she has her coffee and she's ready to go. So Kate over on YouTube is asking, is there a reason for using the zigzag stitch as a tack down for that wool? So Kate, the zigzag stitch is digitized into the design. So it's already in the design. That's something that we here at Hoop Sisters like to do to be able to tack that down fully, as opposed to, because you're kind of cutting it so that it fits, I would say, very narrowly within the placement stitch itself. And the zigzag just secures it a little better until you can get your placement stitched onto it, or your background fabric tacked down like in this block. Okay, now for step 4, we're going to take flower fabric 2, which is kind of this bright reddish orange fabric. I'm going to snip a couple threads first. And I'm going to align this over the placement stitch. I just peek under it, make sure it's covering nicely. And I can see exactly where it needs to align because I'm just looking at my instructions right here. And this is the step that I'm on. So I know exactly where it's going to stitch. And then down here, it tells me exactly what fabric to lay down, how to trim it, all that stuff. So still with a water soluble thread. So you haven't had to change your thread yet. Just keep that water soluble thread in your needle. We're going to tack this down. So Debbie, this fabric, it's by Poppy Cotton. It's part of their Country Confetti line. And I believe the name of it is Bell Pepper Orange. I will say, I think it's more red. It has more red in it than orange, I think. Okay, so now that that is all tacked down, I'm just going to take my hoop off the machine so I can move it around a little bit. And now we need to trim our fabric. I'm going to trim with our Hoop Scissors Mini again. You saw us use this yesterday for the applique portions. You can also use the regular size hoop scissors. Really, just as long as you have this offset handle and really sharp scissors, obviously, it's going to make trimming this really simple. Now, when I trim this, in our instructions, it says, reserve scraps for use in another block if desired. So this is what that means. When you're trimming a scant 1/4 inch from your tack down stitching. And it doesn't have to be perfect because everything is digitized to stitch exactly where it should. You're not lining up your raw edges exactly or anything like that. But the parts that I'm saving are these parts right here. Does that make sense? So for instance, this piece, I could save and I can reuse it in another block if I'd like to. And when I'm trimming, just like with applique, I'm going to keep my hoop on a hard, flat surface. I'm not going to place it in my lap. I want to make sure that I'm not kind of compromising what is hooped, the battleizer in the block. If you place it in your lap, you have the potential to add a little bit too much pressure to the back of the hoop and either pop it out of the hoop or just shift it a little bit, which would make the satin stitches off center.
And Barbara says all your instructions are great. They are very detailed and easy to follow.
Oh, good. Thank you, Barbara. And so again, you can save your scraps if you want to reuse those in another block. I just think that's a good use of them as opposed to just throwing them in the trash. Okay. So now we get to the fun part. This is where we get to the stitch and flip part. And we are on step 5. So you have this strip of fabric that you cut. You're going to take your strip of fabric and you're not going to cross cut it. There's no need to because you'll kind of do that as you go with placing it. And I also want to show you in the instructions. So on step 5, you can kind of see this. If you guys have your instructions in front of you, obviously you'll be able to see this in more detail, but you'll kind of see a darker line where it's going to sew your seam. And then you can see this box. There's a blue box right there that shows you exactly where to place your fabric if you're a little confused on which side is the seam going to sew on. So that will help you. That's where you want to place your fabric. So I'm going to place my fabric right side down. I'm going to approximately align the raw edges of the fabric I'm placing with the raw edges of this reddish orange fabric that I just trimmed. It doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, everything is digitized to stitch exactly where it should. We're not working with perfect seams right now. So we're going to take a neutral colored thread, and that just means a thread that kind of coordinates with your fabric color. I have a matching in my needle actually, and we're going to sew our seam.
And if you're posting any questions there that we haven't gotten to yet, don't worry. We will get back to those and we will be answering them when Sarah's done demonstrating the block. So keep your questions coming and we'll make sure we answer all of them.
Now I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to turn it right side up. I'll finger press and smooth out. And then with that same thread in the needle, we are going to sew the tack down. You're going to see that this is going to sew the tack down around this twice. And the reason for that is because we are going to trim close to that tack down stitching because the outside part of the flower is truly an applique part. So again, I'm going to take my hoop off. I'm going to use my Hoop Scissors Mini. I'll keep my hoop on a hard, flat surface. And I'm going to trim as close as I can to that tack down stitching. And like I said yesterday, when I'm trimming applique and you're trimming close to the tack down stitching, I find it helps to get a nice clean cut if I just apply a little bit of gentle pressure outward on my fabric. I'm not tugging on it a whole lot, just a little bit, and it helps get a nice clean trim. Okay, so same thing, and we're just going to keep doing this until we get all the way around the flower. So I'm going to take my fabric, I'll lay it right side down, and I'm going to approximately align the raw edges with the raw edges of that fabric 2 that we placed earlier. Again, for step 7, I'm referencing exactly where to place my fabric and where it will sew the seam based on the box that's in this picture. And then we're going to turn it right side up. Finger press, smooth out, and then we'll sew our tack down again. Okay, now we're going to trim. And we're going to keep going until we have all of these. Do you want to answer some questions while I keep working to fill in the rest of this flower, Annie? Hold on a second. I'm going to mute myself, and then if you want to unmute. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Barb had a comment. She said that she made a leaf block yesterday and she used that hint about gently pulling the fabric outward while you trim. And she said it really helped her. So that's pretty cool. So I do have a few. Hopefully we will get to all the questions here. And Barb, you also had a question about if you want to skip the wool, which is our step 2 that Sarah's already done. So basically that is done on your machine. You should be able at the machine level to see all your steps. So your first step would be that placement stitch. And then that second step is the wool. So if you want to skip the wool and not use it, you should be able to just push an arrow button on your machine that takes you over to the next step. And so maybe if you have any more questions in your specific machine, maybe your machine dealer can help you with that. And then let's see, Mary Jane has a question. She said, when I sewed my basic block, my wool tack down did not cover the top and bottom of the wool, though I cut the wool the correct size. Sometimes, Mary Jane, maybe it happened when you were pressing. Possibly when you were pressing the wool, maybe it came in a little. I'm really not entirely sure. Sometimes you may need to like just pull it to get it to meet that basting stitch. But if it's just a little parts of it that didn't, I think it's okay for you to go to the next step and place your background fabric over the top of the wool, and then it'll do the tack down stitch. So as long as it caught some of it or most of it, you should be just fine. And then we have, let's see, Melissa, what happens to the bobbin thread when the water soluble thread washes away? it stays in there. It does stay in there, and there's no problem with it staying in there. So you don't need to worry about that. And then let's see. Diane, you asked, how do you avoid the sharp points of the mini scissors from getting stuck in the battleizer when trimming? Got any suggestions there, Sarah?
What was the question?
How do you avoid the sharp points of the mini from getting stuck in the battleizer when trimming?
Well, I would say with this black in particular, most of where you're trimming already has fabric over it. So if you're just trimming right on these areas, kind of where you see me trimming right now, there's already fabric here. So I guess I don't really have that happen with this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer
Yeah.
that.
And I would, hopefully you were able to hear what Sarah said. Another, if you ever have one of our blocks, and it doesn't happen very often, where you need to trim where there's battleizer or wool, one of the things you could do is rather than coming in with the points first, maybe just lower it down to where you need to trim. But like Sarah said, most of the time, like she's doing right now, you're doing your trimming, which is on top of fabric. So hopefully that answers your question. And let's see if anyone else has any that I missed. Sarah, I'm going to let you answer this question because this is your design, and honestly, I am not familiar with it. But Sue says each of the flower petals in step 5 through 24 contain a step to add wool before the tack down. Are you recommending adding the wool for loft?
No, there is not a step to add wool individually in here. The step to add wool would be step 2.
Okay.
So each of those steps it's not intending for you to add wool. If you are having a little confusion over that, maybe email Nina or myself and we can help you out with it. But the wool is added in step 2 for that additional.
Yes, step 2 is where the wool is, Sue. So hopefully that helps. And of course, Nina can help you anytime anyone has a question that we don't get to here. And that's all the questions I see. Hopefully I found them all. Wait a minute. Let's see. So Linda had a good tip about the scissors. She says if you keep the scissors flat against the project, your point should not get caught in the battleizer.
Okay, I just have a couple more pieces to do.
Okay, she's almost done. Okay, and Mary asks, when placing the fabric, how do you know how far up to put it? Basically, where Sarah's putting it, she places it where it needs to be. Right now, she's doing a stitch and flip. So when she's doing the seam, you're going to place the raw edge of the fabric even with the raw edge, like the light orange there. She's placing the raw edge even. Maybe she can show you on this next step.
Yep.
But you're just going to place those raw edges even, and then it sews the seam. And if you're doing an applique, you're just going to peek under it. We put placement stitches down so you know where to put it, and you would just peek underneath it so that you know you have it entirely covered.
Do you want to mute yourself and I'll mute?
Yeah.
Walk through it a little on this. Okay. Okay, so Mary said, when placing the fabric, how do you know how far up to put it? So Mary, I've got my strip, right? And I have these two pieces to still place. The first one is going to be over here. And the reason that I know that is because I can look at step 21 in my instructions, and I'm just kind of referencing the diagram. So how I'm going to place my fabric. So I know the seam is going to stitch kind of at the top of my fabric in this part. So I'll take my fabric, my seam is going to stitch right along here, and I'm just going to lay it right side down. This fabric doesn't have a right or a wrong side, but if yours does, lay it right side down. Raw edges are approximately even with kind of along where it's going to sew my seam. So the top part of that orangey red fabric. I just want to make sure that, and I can even cheat this up a little. I just want to make sure that I'm going to have enough fabric, maybe like a 1/2 inch toward the bottom of where it's going to stitch and a 1/2 inch toward the top, which I've got plenty because I've got a whole strip of fabric. And then I'm going to sew the seam. And it doesn't have to be placed perfectly on there.
And Jean, when Sarah's finished here at the machine, we will show the quilt. It will be hanging on the wall behind us. So hang tight with us and you'll be able to see it in just a little while.
Okay, so you can kind of see I've got this extra fabric right here, and I've got my whole strip of fabric up here. Again, I placed raw edges approximately even. You could overlap a little bit if you have a darker fabric underneath like we do here. So you can overlap that top one a little bit, but now I'm just going to take my fabric, turn it right side up, finger press, smooth it out, and then just kind of keep smoothing while it's sewing the tack down. Okay, so again, we're just kind of taking it off the machine, keeping our block in the hoop, and then we're using those hoop scissors mini. I know you can't see what I'm doing right now, sorry. We're using the hoop scissors mini to trim close to our tack down stitching because this outside part is an applique. And as I'm trimming, I'm just gently pulling outward to apply a little pressure to get a nice clean cut on my fabric. Okay, one last time. So I'll take my fabric, align those raw edges approximately, and sew my seam. And then flip it right side up, finger press and smooth out and sew our tack down. Okay. One last time for trimming. Okay. So there is the majority of our flower already done. Now, there is a little bit more applique to do, but our stitch and flip process is completed for this block. And now we just get to do the pretty parts of adding some of that quilting. So I'm going to change my thread to one that contrasts my fabric, my mango colored fabric. I want to contrast because this is just going to sew some of the details on those petals. Oh, Mary, that's so nice. She said she's so thankful for these lives for visual learning and that we do a fantastic job explaining. Thank you, Mary. I'm glad that they are helpful for you. It's nice during the lives too to be able to ask questions and get an answer. Aubrey's dropping stuff in the background. Hello, Emily. Welcome in.
Joyce said you're really good that you answered her question before she could even ask.
Oh, yeah. It's like I knew.
Vibrating. Boy, there's very few questions today.
I know. Sometimes it's just more fun to watch and hang out. Okay, so this next step is going to be the satin stitch step, and it's going to sew the satin stitch around our mango colored fabric. So I'm going to place that thread back in my needle. I'm going to let this stitch out, and while it stitches out, I'm going to move over to the other camera and I'll show you some more examples of projects that use stitch and flip in one moment.
Sarah, while you're there, you were going to show, and maybe you want to do it when it's done stitching, how to reserve some of that fabric maybe for the next block.
Yeah, I did. I showed that when we did step. Oh, goodness. Yes, I did show that when we did step.
So I must have fallen asleep.
You know, it's hard to listen to me while reading comments, so I get that. Yeah, that was step 4. So if you missed that on the live, after the live is over, you'll be able to see kind of how to save scraps from trimming on step 4 to use on another block. That is so funny. Linda just said, are you a thread licker too? Yep, sure am.
Even with water soluble thread?
No, not with water soluble. Okay, Barbara's asking, is this where you would put on a backing piece? Yes. Yeah, so thank you for asking that, Barbara. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So I would, if you want to add backing to this, again, like we said yesterday, it's not built into the design. You don't have this written in your instructions, so you just have to be very mindful if you decide to do this, that you are doing some of the things that we talked about yesterday when adding your backing. But if you want to add backing for this block and have it done in the hoop, I would add it after step 24, which was our last tack down step. I would then trim and I would add my backing fabric by going back to step 1 to tack it down and then fast forwarding to step 25. Step 25, by the way, was the step that stitched this dark red detail on my flowers. Mary said she has a question. When is the baby due? Sometime in June, and it's coming really fast. And this is my 3rd, so naturally I've done 0 preparation for it. It stresses me out just a little bit if you can't tell. Okay, I'm gonna grab a couple things and show them stuff. Okay. So while that is stitching, we're going to steal the camera. Because I just wanted to show you guys a couple other examples of some of our designs that use the stitch and flip technique and how versatile I think it is. You can do a lot of things with it.
It's very versatile.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I would say, it's faster than a satin stitch too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stitch and flip in that block that we just did. So it takes a little bit of time, but it's still a lot faster than if you were to
Do all the
do
satin
applique
stitches.
with that. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And I think that the little bit of the darker color you have in the petals
Mm-hmm.
in the center, I think it just really adds to
It
it.
pops. Yeah.
It
Oh, you know
does.
what? Someone asked
yeah.
to see. I'm going to take this down.
Okay.
Someone asked to see our sample. So before we hop into these, okay, I see this comment. Mary said, third babies are easygoing and go with the flow. Mary, I like that. I'm a third baby.
No. Aubrey is in the background shaking her head in horror going, no. She's the first.
This live is a little wild. Oh, okay.
She's thinking of her own.
I was thinking of me, Aubrey.
Of course you would.
Yeah. Okay, so here is the sample, as much of it as we can get on the camera. But so this is the block that we're stitching right now. It's just sewing that satin stitching. This is what we stitched yesterday, and then you can see the border it's a fun place to put a print in the border. I will say some of the quilting is a little tougher to see on this one, but it is beautiful quilting in the border as well. So yeah. There's the sample. I apologize. I don't remember who asked for that, but I know someone asked to be able to see that.
Do you want me to take this off?
Yeah, take that off.
Get the strawberries.
Yes. So stitch and flip. This is just another example of kind of how something is pieced using that stitch and flip. These are just cute little strawberries with unique piecing, and 3 of them, I believe. So fun use of stitch and flip in that one. And then this one, I believe it's called Threads Up. This has more kind of a monochromatic stitch and flip look to it. But you can kind of see how it's used there as well. That's where you can see it the best. So just a fun use of stitch and flip in this one as well. Let's see. If you guys have any questions, I'm trying to go through comments, make sure we didn't miss anything. Just let us know and we'll get those answered. I think our satin stitch is a little more than, yeah, it's more than halfway done. So we got a couple more minutes. Linda Russell is the 3rd child of 7 sisters. Wow, Linda, that's awesome.
Nina has a lot of siblings.
She does.
Yep.
Yes, Nina has a lot of siblings too, Aubrey just said.
I don't remember how many, but what?
That is. Okay, just hang with us for a little bit longer while this satin stitch finishes up.
I think one of the questions that sometimes we get asked is that our instructions may call for a neutral colored thread, and we usually just ask for that when we're stitching a seam. And it's basically just a color thread that is going to blend in with the fabric you have. You can use just a regular sewing thread. You can use your embroidery thread that you have that's going to, you know, match the fabrics that you're using. But that's all we need for that.
Annie's gonna show you another stitch and flip block. Oh gosh, I'm gonna start saying it wrong.
Aubrey is trying to say it backwards again. This design came out in January, and it's called Serendipity. And this has quite a bit of stitch and flip in it. You can see this is our block right here. So it's really fun to stitch out. You just start placing fabric, stitch and flip all these different areas until you get it complete. So this is a fun little quilt also that has all stitch and flip. And you can see the quilting is included with the design as always. And on this particular one, we added the backing while it was in the hoop.
That's a good example of that. We were talking about that yesterday. That's a really good example with the
right. And we did that because this is really lends itself to be a huge quilt. You can make it into a bigger quilt if you want to. So you get the choice to skip adding the backing. You still will sew the basting stitch for that. And then when you do add the backing, you do have to match your needle thread and your bobbin thread. So you can see where, I'm trying to find an example. You can see it's blue here and peach there. And that's what we did here is you're going to match your needle and your bobbin thread. So there's an example of one that had the backing added.
Okay, I'm gonna steal the camera back for a second and walk through the next couple steps. And then I see, Mary, I see your question on thread. We'll get to that in a moment. And Jackie's saying, what is the name of the print fabric on the finished quilt you are making? I would say the print and the border, I think is what you're referring to. And that is by Poppy Cotton. And I apologize, I don't have the line or the name of it off the top of my head, but it is all by Poppy Cotton. Okay, I'm gonna hop. Okay, so now we are on step 27 for this one. We're going to take our center piece of our flower. We're going to align that right over the center, and then we'll tack it down. This is an applique portion of this block. Okay, and now before we move on to the decorative part and the satin stitch, we're going to take our hoop scissors mini, and again, we're going to trim as close as we can to that tack down stitching. Okay, and this next step, step 28, is just going to sew some of the decorative stitching on the inside of that fabric we just placed. Oh, thank you, Nina. She said that the fabric that Jackie was asking about, so the fabric in the border is a line called Hide and Seek by Poppy Cotton in the color yellow. Okay, I'm going to change my thread one more time. Okay, two more times. There's two more steps. And I'm going to change it to a thread that matches that darker orange fabric. And we'll sew our satin stitch. And now remember, if you're adding the backing, like we had talked about earlier after step 24, you want to make sure that you're matching your bobbin thread to the thread that's in your needle for these steps. But again, because this design and the size of it just lends itself better to a one-piece backing, if you're not, those specific things that you would need to do if you kind of changed it and added it, the backing and the hoop. Those aren't listed in the instructions. That was hard for me to get out, I think. I don't know why. Yes, Mary is right. Mary on YouTube said some fabric is by Michael Miller and some is poppy cotton. And yes, you are right. So like the backing fabric, the white fabric that you see here is a Michael Miller. But the print in the border is definitely a poppy cotton fabric. Melissa said, have you turned off the automatic thread cutter already? That's a really good question. So I did not turn off the automatic thread cutter. And the reason I didn't do it is because I did not add the backing fabric in the hoop. So there's no backing on here. So the reason to turn off the automatic thread cutter if you've added your backing fabric is really to avoid what we call bird's nests. So like clumps of thread on the back of your block, and it helps make the back look just as pretty as the front. Because I didn't add my backing fabric in the hoop, I didn't even bother with turning off my automatic thread cutter. Okay, last thread change. You know what? There are a lot of steps in this block, and there aren't that many thread changes, which is one thing that I love about that stitch and flip technique too. You can just keep that neutral colored thread in your needle for most of it.
Too many thread changes slows you down.
That's right. Okay, so this very last step is just going to sew the quilting in the background. Okay, after we're done stitching this block, do you guys want to see us trim it with the trimmer by George today? Do you want us to do the quick demonstration today? We are going to do it again tomorrow, but we've got a little bit of time and we can definitely do that today as well if you guys would like to see it. Let me know in the comments. Okay. Okay, we're going to show them a demo on trimming. You want to do that, Annie, in a second? Hi, Deb Randall. I see Miss Deb is on. Okay. So here is our final block. We're going to go ahead and get it set up and we'll do a trimmer by George demonstration.
And I think it was Mary Jean maybe that had a question about thread, and she wanted us to give her, she had good questions, so we'll get to that.
You want to answer that first or you want to wait?
It's
up to you.
Well, maybe we don't want to keep Mary Jane waiting.
I think she's waiting for that demonstration as well.
Okay.
So
All right.
Mary Jane says she has a bunch of rayon thread that was given to her, but on the first day you said you prefer polyester thread. So what do you mean by that? Do you mean all-purpose polyester thread like she would use in regular sewing?
No, there is rayon embroidery thread specifically for embroidery. And there's also polyester embroidery thread. And the polyester embroidery thread is what we recommend but that doesn't mean that you can't use your rayon thread. I think the reason we prefer, I know the reason we prefer the polyester is because it has a little more strength. And since we're stitching through more layers than we would perhaps on just a regular, embroidered design, that's why we would prefer the polyester. But Mary Jane, go ahead and try your rayon and see if it's going to work for you. And if it works for you, that would be great, especially since you were given all that thread. That's a huge blessing, but try it and see if it works. And if you start experiencing breakage or anything, then you might want to try going to a polyester embroidery thread.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah has her block complete. So, and I'm going to explain about the trimmer by George. Some of you have heard this probably several times, but I'm just going to explain about what the tool is and why we need it for those who are new to Hoop Sisters. So it's an acrylic ruler. The only difference between this ruler and another one is the fact that it has this metal edge that you see right here. And what this metal edge does is it's a lip that's going to protect the fabric on your block so you don't accidentally cut into it. And then it gives also a straight edge to cut against. So what you need to do with your block is you need to basically cut away the battleizer right up to that basting stitch. And so if you were to use the scissors to try that, it's very likely that you're going to slice right in to the fabric that you need to have there for your seam. And the same thing would happen if you tried to use a rotary cutter and a ruler. You would probably end up getting way too close to this at some point and end up slicing into that fabric too. So this metal edge on our trimmer by George, you just shimmy it in there between the battleizer and the fabric on the front and then lay it down. And I like to always give the battleizer a gentle tug so that that metal edge is right up against that basting stitch. So you can see you have your edge to cut again. Well, your fabric is inside there and it's being protected. We do recommend that you're going to need a 60 millimeter rotary cutter. And that's because that metal edge will lift that up just a little bit. So you need the extra height that the 60 will give you. So I'm just I have my fabric and trimmer where it needs to be. And I almost cut into a cord. And then you just use the straight edge with the 60 millimeter rotary cutter. And then you can just trim it away. And as you can see, it's very close to the basting stitch. It's white on white. That's not helpful. And then you can see how it's close to the basting stitch here. That way, when you sew this block to another block, you don't have the bulk of that battleizer in between there. So I'm just going to shimmy it in the next one.
Can I ask a question before you keep trimming?
Yes.
So when you started trimming, it was kind of like this, and we had this big chunk of fabric battleizer over here. Margaret was curious why you have all this battleizer off to the side and asking if it saves on battleizer.
That's a very good question. Well, there's a couple things when you hoop it, our battleizer comes in a 5-yard package, or you could get a 15-yard bolt, and it's 24 inches wide. So this would be where the 24 inches came from. One of the things you could do is you could leave this and not trim it, and then you could just rehoop right here with this still attached to it. The other thing you can do to save on this, I certainly would not throw this in the trash can, is you would save this, and then when you get another piece of it, you butt it right up against the other one, edge to edge, and you do a zigzag stitch. You just need to make sure that you're not overlapping the battleizer at all. And I'll show you another tip when I get done trimming this side. I like to trim here and then here, because then I have everything that's the same width. And then you can Frankenbath them together with that zigzag stitch. So I'm going to do this side. So I'm just sliding the metal edge against the basting stitch. Give it a gentle tug. You do need to do a visual. Make sure none of that fabric is peeking out. And then you can use your 60 millimeter rotary cutter to trim that away. Now, I don't have a lot here, but there may be sometimes just pretend it's bigger than it is. But if you wanted to Frankenbath these two together, one of the things you could do to make sure that you have an exact straight stitch there or an exact line is you can overlap them just a tiny bit. slide this down here a little. And then you could just cut through both of them at the same time and then remove the other two pieces. Now you know that's going to be absolutely perfect. And then you could use a zigzag stitch to sew them together. And then you could just rehoop this. So it's a great way to save on battleizer and not having to buy as much of it. You hate to throw all that in your trash can. We would never do that.
Yeah.
So then again, I'm going to do another side. Your metal edge slides under the fabric on the front and you lay it down, give it a gentle tug, make sure there's no fabric peeking out, and then you use your 60mm rotary cutter to cut that away. I'm going to go ahead and do this side as well.
While you do that, I see a quick question. Barb, a couple minutes ago, had asked how long are the replays up for? She doesn't think she'll be able to finish all of the classes this week. That's completely fine, Barb. On Facebook, which is where you're watching, the replays will remain available for 30 days. I believe in your email, you will also receive a link linking you to the YouTube video, which will be there as long as YouTube is around.
Hopefully for a long time. So here's my block. I've trimmed all 4 sides. Any side that's going to be joined to another block, you would trim this in this fashion. If you have a side of your block, such as in this case on the quilt, would be the border blocks, on the side where the binding is, you're going to trim 1/4 inch through all the layers. So here we have this, but we've got all this extra fabric. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the ruler side, kind of a dual tool, and we're going to trim the fabric 1/4 inch from the basting stitch. So I'm just going to line up my 1/4 inch mark and trim this down.
And Miss Barb Brown over on Facebook, this is asking a question or answering a question that you asked a little bit ago. So yes, we do use George to trim the blocks to 1/4 inch.
And I didn't even know she had that question. So
Yeah.
there you go. Mind readers today. Okay.
I feel like this group is asking really good questions.
They are asking really good
are.
questions.
So there's the front of the block and there's the back. So you can see we have 1/4 inch. Our battleizer is just about right up to that basting stitch. So then when you sew the blocks together, you don't have all that bulk in the seam. And because of that metal edge of the George, we didn't slice into something we don't want to slice into.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I see that Shannon said she saves all her battleizer scraps, even the little ones for like mug rugs, coasters, ornaments, little things.
Yeah.
And then Diane also had a really good idea. She says she doesn't throw any of it away and she uses it for stuffing other projects and things like that. So that's smart. Smart. And Miss Deb is at home making Frankenbat right now. Okay, I'm going to put us back up on the screen. I think there's 2 more starred questions that I see. So Wenda, this was probably about 10 minutes ago. You said, did the question regarding the wool get answered? I had to take a phone call. I don't specifically know what question we're referring to with the wool now. So
I do remember there was a question where somebody said where the zigzag didn't quite catch the wool.
got it.
And if the zigzag does not quite catch the wool, it's okay to place your fabric over the top of it. I'm sure it would catch the wool in parts of it, but may miss it in other parts. And so that's why it's kind of important to make sure that wool is going to meet that basting stitch or the placement stitch in step 1. And the other thing is sometimes when you place it on there, the flattened wool that we prepared might extend past that zigzag. And I will just get out my hoop scissors mini and then trim that up to the zigzag stitch.
Yep. Okay. And then Melissa said, I wanted to put the backing on. Can you do it right before? Sorry, Melissa. I don't know what step I was on when you asked this.
I think it was 24.
But right after step 24, you'd go back to step 1 to tack down the backing on the back of your hoop. And then you'll have to fast forward to step 25. You just have to remember to do that because like I said, it's really intended to be a one-piece backing, but I would say with almost any design, as long as you're really paying attention, you could probably use that trick to do it. The main thing is after the piecing, you go back to step one to tack down the backing fabric. Or if you want to wait and do some of the satin stitching and you don't want that to pull through the back, at whatever point you want, you're going to go back to step
you
one.
can choose where you want, when you want to add that.
Yes.
So.
Okay. You want to answer Sandy's question?
Is George a hoop husband? He's an adopted hoop daddy. So George is someone that he's passed on, and he was married to a lady named Martha. So that in itself is pretty cute. It was George and Martha. And Martha would test sew our designs, and she would make sure that her instructions and the design itself as it stitches does as it's supposed to do. And she was test sewing when our double wedding ring came out. And when she was test sewing, she had to trim that battleizer up to the basting stitch. And she tried it with the scissors, and she tried it with rotary cutter and ruler, and had sliced into it. And it takes a while to make one of those blocks. So you can imagine, after doing that a few times, the frustration that she ran into. But what was so sweet is that George would sit right by Martha as she's stitching these things out, and he'd help her and read the instructions and that to her. And he could see the frustration that was building in her. And he was a retired tool and die maker. He went out to his garage, and he basically, our very first trimmer by George, he took a piece of gutter material, and he had a machine that would crimp the edge of it. And that was our first trimmer by George. And George would make them. Martha would put the labels on them, put them in bags, and then they deliver them to us. So, and we had to honor George by naming this tool after him. So that's why it's the trimmer by George, because George made it and invented it.
Really cool. Okay. Amy on Facebook said, sorry, I missed, she's in Willamette Valley, Oregon. She said, sorry, I missed the first two classes. And she said she's a complete novice. So what is that? So Amy, you got to go back and watch class 1. That was on Monday.
Right.
And class 2, that was yesterday. You can get those on Facebook where you're watching, or over on YouTube. But we cover this in detail in the first class, Back to Basics. Battleizer is our batting and stabilizer combination product. So you're just hooping the one product as opposed to hooping a piece of stabilizer and adding batting on top of it.
And it's very thin, so it's super, super easy to hoop. But, you know, it's batting for a quilt and stabilizer that you need for embroidery.
Diane still uses Trimmer by George version 1. So that's pretty cool. Really cool.
I have a bronze original in a frame.
Yeah. Yes. You do, don't
you? A gift from George.
Yes. All right. Well, I think we covered everything with the stitch and flip class. Not the flip and stitch class, Aubrey. The stitch and flip class. So your homework, we're going to give you guys homework, is to stitch out each of the flower blocks, or at least just stitch a couple of them. Stitch out the flower blocks and post it in our Facebook VIP group so that we can encourage one another as we're doing this. This has been really fun so far.
It has been fun. So we're going to have fun tomorrow too.
Yes, because tomorrow is the putting it all together class. So you've got your blocks, you watch the trimming demonstration, you know how to trim them, but then what do you do?
Right.
So we'll cover all that tomorrow. We're going to do the anchor point pinning technique. We're going to join our blocks together. We are going to show you how to add sashing. We're going to show you how to add a one-piece backing. We're going to do a quick kind of binding overview tutorial.
That's a lot.
I know. You know, someone asked for binding when we were in workshop week, and I said, sure, let's do it. So we have a jam-packed day tomorrow. So
I'm excited.
Yeah, go stitch your flower blocks and post pictures of your blocks in our Facebook VIP group so we can encourage one another. And then we will see you tomorrow, same place at 11 a.m. Eastern for us. So see you guys then.
See you tomorrow.